Okay, let's get into it. We're doing a deep dive today into the incredible organization that we call life.
We really are. We're looking at a collection of sources that map out biological order from, the tiniest particles all the way up to the entire planet.
But the mission here isn't just to list all the levels, is it?
No, not at all. It's about understanding the why. We're looking at the system scientists call biological organization. And the key thing to realize is that this hierarchy, it's not some accident. It feels more like an optimized blueprint.
And that's the really mind-blowing claim from these sources, that
Mhm.
fundamental physical constraints, I'm talking about things like the universe's own information processing limits, actually shape the optimal size of a protein.
Exactly. We're going to trace that whole hierarchy to show how that jaw-dropping claim holds up.
So we have to start with the core concept that makes all of this possible. This idea that complexity isn't just about adding more parts.
It's that complexity creates entirely new features. This is a concept of emergent properties. And it's really the philosophical foundation of all of modern biology.
And the classic example is, well, think about it. No single atom in your body is alive.
Right.
Not even a specialized molecule.
Absolutely not.
But you arrange them in just the right way, you ramp up the complexity, and suddenly you get a cell, then an organ, then a whole thinking, living being.
And that property, life itself or consciousness, it just emerges. It's completely absent from any of the individual parts. It's this unbroken chain of organization, one level building the function of the next.
So let's trace that chain. We have to start at the absolute bottom, at the microscopic level. We start with the atom.
The smallest unit of matter that still has the properties of an element: protons, neutrons, electrons. But for life, we're really talking about 6 main players.
Right, not the whole periodic table, just 6.
The heavy hitters: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, or CHNRPS as we call it.
Carbon is the backbone, of course. But you argue that nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur are maybe even more important. Why those 3?
Because they provide the chemical complexity, the functional groups. Nitrogen is what makes a protein. It's in all nucleic acids. Phosphorus is the key to energy, ATP, and DNA's structure. And sulfur literally holds proteins together.
They provide the character to the molecules.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
So atoms bond together, they form a molecule, and we're focused on the big ones here, the 4 main types of macromolecules.
You have carbohydrates, which are your sugars, mainly for quick energy and structure. Then lipids, fats. They're for long-term energy storage. And critically, they form the oily barrier of the cell membrane.
The plasma membrane.
Exactly. And then you get to the real stars of the show, which are the proteins that do everything: build structures, run chemical reactions, and the nucleic acids that store the genetic blueprint.
And we'll be coming back to their specific complexity later. It's crucial.
It is. All these molecules come together to build the cell, the fundamental unit of life. And for something to be a cell, it has to have that plasma membrane to maintain a stable internal environment.
Homeostasis.
Right. And it needs internal compartments, organelles that act like tiny organs, each with a specific job.
And right away, we hit a major fork in the road. The difference between prokaryotes like bacteria, which are just single cells with no nucleus, no internal membranes.
And then the eukaryotes, which have that dedicated nucleus and all this complex internal machinery, they can be single-celled, like yeast, or they can build, well, us.
And once you go multicellular, the complexity just keeps stacking up. Similar cells group together to form tissue.
Yep. In humans, you have 4 main types: epithelial tissue that covers surfaces, muscle for movement, nervous for communication, and connective tissue holding it all together.
Then those tissues assemble into an organ, a structure with a very specific function. The sources use the stomach as a great example because it's made of all 4 tissue types working together.
And multiple organs then cooperate in an organ system. So the stomach is part of the digestive system, along with the liver, the intestines, and so on.
And finally, all those systems working in concert create the organism, a single living thing.
From atom to organism, that gives us the physical context.
Okay, so once you have all these organisms, you need a way to sort them. Which brings us to part 2, the science of taxonomy.
Right. This is the system for naming and classifying everything. It started back in the 1700s with Carl Linnaeus, who was just going by what he could see, shared characteristics.
But now, of course, it's all about DNA sequencing and molecular evidence. The whole system is constantly being updated.
Constantly. But the basic hierarchy is still there.
Let's walk through that hierarchy, from the absolute broadest down to the most specific.
At the very top, you have the domain. There are only 3. Eukarya, which is us, plants, fungi, archaea, those ancient single-celled life forms in extreme places, and then bacteria.
And one step down from that is kingdom, the six big ones: bacteria, archaea, fungi, protista, animalia, and plantae. But one of these is not like the others.
Ah, yes, protista. It's a mess. A total catch-all group for eukaryotes that aren't plants, animals, or fungi. Scientists are still trying to sort it out because it doesn't fit the neat model.
It's like the junk drawer of biology.
That is the perfect analogy.
So after kingdom, you step down through phylum, class, order, family, genus, until you finally hit species, the most specific level.
And the defining rule for a species is that its members have to be able to interbreed and produce offspring that are also fertile.
And that's where we get the universal naming system, the binomial nomenclature.
Yes, using the genus and the species name together. Always in italics, genus capitalized. So for a leopard, it's Pantherus pardus. Every scientist on Earth knows exactly what that means.
And that structural logic, it's not just for naming things. It's fundamental to how things are designed.
Yeah.
We have to touch on form, fit, function.
Oh, absolutely. It's a core principle of evolution. The structure of any biological part is directly correlated to the job it has to do.
The example from the sources is a bird's wing. It has hollow bones.
Right. That structure makes it lighter, which directly serves the function of flight. It might be less strong than a solid bone, but that's the evolutionary trade-off. Form is optimized for function.
And that same logic of optimization and constraints applies as we scale up beyond the individual into the world of ecology.
The principles are the same, but the constraints are now environmental. We step out of the single organism and into a population.
Which is a group of the same species living in the same place at the same time.
Then you combine different populations, the bears, the pine trees, the mushrooms, and now you have a community.
And a community plus all the non-living things, the soil, the water, the sunlight, that gives you an ecosystem.
Right. Those are the abiotic factors, and they are absolutely crucial. They define the boundaries and rules for all the life within that system.
Scale up even more, and you get a biome. A huge area like a desert or a rainforest, defined by a similar climate and vegetation.
And the biggest level of all is the biosphere. That's just everything. All life on Earth and the parts of the planet where it exists.
Now, these massive scales, the organizing principle is all about the flow of energy. And this is where biology really has to obey the laws of physics.
It's all about thermodynamics. The second law tells us that every time energy changes form, you lose some of it as heat. That means energy flow is unidirectional. It can't be perfectly recycled.
Which leads directly to the famous 10% rule in ecology.
Exactly. On average, only about 10% of the energy from one level of the food chain makes it up to the next. The other 90% is lost.
And that's why you can have a vast field of grass supporting a much smaller number of gazelles, which in turn support a tiny number of lions. It's a pyramid because of this energy loss.
It's a strict physical constraint on the entire structure of an ecosystem.
And that energy gets into the system in the first place primarily through photosynthesis, plants using sunlight to make chemical energy.
But not always. The sources remind us of chemosynthesis. Down in the deep ocean, around hydrothermal vents, entire ecosystems are powered by the chemical energy from things like hydrogen sulfide. No sunlight needed.
So what controls the flow of that energy? The sources identify two main pathways, and they look very different on land versus in the water.
They do. First are bottom-up controls. This is all about the availability and quality of the resources at the bottom of the food chain.
On land, plants are pretty tough. They're full of cellulose and lignin. Not very nutritious.
Right. But in the ocean, the primary producers are phytoplankton. They're basically tiny, single-celled, nutrient-packed little snacks with no physical defenses.
Which means they are much better food. And that difference leads to the other control system, top-down controls.
Exactly. Because phytoplankton are so nutritious and defenseless, herbivores in the ocean eat them at a rate 4 times greater than herbivores on land eat plants.
So the predators and the grazers have a much stronger effect on the system in the ocean.
A much stronger top-down control. It's why you see these really dramatic cascade effects in marine food webs that are often less intense on land. It all goes back to the structure of the producers at the bottom.
Speaking of weird structures, we have to mention the carnivorous plants, the Venus flytrap.
A perfect example of evolution finding a workaround. They still photosynthesize for energy, but they live in terrible soil with no nitrogen.
So they evolved to get their nitrogen from another source.
By digesting insects. It's a structural adaptation to get around a resource constraint.
Which is the perfect transition to the deepest, most surprising part of this whole deep dive. We've seen how structure and function are shaped by constraints. But what about the most fundamental constraints? The computational reason for the hierarchy itself.
We have to go back to emergence. We talked about weak emergence, where a system is so complex you can't predict it without just running the whole simulation.
But then there's the much more radical idea. Strong emergence. The idea that higher levels have new causal powers that you can't reduce back to the parts, even in principle.
It implies downward causation, the whole actually influencing its own parts. It's controversial, but the sources bring in cosmology to back it up.
Which sounds crazy, but the logic is, well, the universe itself has a finite amount of computing power, a physical limit on how many operations it can perform. It's a huge number, something like 10 to the 120.
But it's not infinite.
Hmm.
And that finite capacity sets a hard physical limit on our ability to predict complex systems from the bottom up. The physics of computation literally limits the physics of biology.
So researchers could actually calculate the complexity threshold where strong emergence has to kick in simply because the system becomes physically unpredictable.
And the number they came up with is just. It's startling. The threshold is between 60 and 92 amino acids for a protein, or a little over 200 nucleotides for a gene.
And that number lands right in the middle of actual biology.
It's a direct hit. Small proteins are typically around 100 amino acids. Most genes are about 1,000 base pairs. Life evolved to operate precisely at the size where these new, non-reducible properties just manifest.
That is phenomenal. So the very effectiveness of our molecules is tied to this cosmological limit. But it also dictates how those molecules are networked together.
Right. This leads to the cost hypothesis, the idea that hierarchy and modularity in biology evolved for one primary reason. There is a physical cost for network connections.
It takes energy and materials to build and maintain every connection in a network, whether it's neurons in a brain or proteins in a cell.
And when they ran computational simulations of evolution, the networks that evolved with a connection cost became way more hierarchical and modular.
While the ones with free connections were just a tangled mess.
A total mess. The low-cost networks solved problems faster. They broke big problems down into smaller subproblems. They organized themselves just like biology does.
And crucially, that hierarchical structure dramatically improves evolvability.
Massively. It's the ability to adapt quickly to new challenges. In a hierarchical modular system, you can tweak one part without crashing the entire thing. It makes evolution faster and safer.
So the whole beautiful, complex organization of life, it's not some grand design. It's an optimized computational structure that emerged as the cheapest, most adaptable way to build something complex under the physical laws of our universe.
Life's architecture is basically an efficient hack, a hack against the physical constraints of the universe, designed to get the most function for the lowest possible cost of connection.
So to wrap this all up, we've traced life from the 6 essential atoms all the way up to the biosphere, all governed by these layers of constraints. But the deepest truth seems to be that the entire hierarchical structure is an optimized response to fundamental limits on computation and energy.
Life is organized this way because it's the most robust, most adaptable, and computationally cheapest way to exist.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on. If the universe's own computing limits mean that complex molecules like proteins are inherently strongly emergent, what does that imply for the future of biology? Are we going to discover new, non-reducible organizing principles, laws of nature that only operate at the level of a cell or a community that we simply can't derive from the laws of chemistry alone?